Good evening, Jets fans. I am Glenn Naughton. This is Jet Nation Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in. First, we want to thank our sponsor, Miles Social. Miles Social helps you handle all of your social networking needs, your social media needs. They will take care of your websites, your SEOs, and all social media. Check out Miles Social at milesocial.com. That's milesocial.com. So, plenty to cover, even though we not a lot of news in the making, but one story that came out yesterday that we'll discuss at length, or for a little bit anyway, from Jets beat writer Brian Costello, who covers the Jets for the New York Post and has for several years. Had an interesting tidbit about the Jets yesterday. We're going to talk a little bit about possible free agent and draft targets. We're not going to do a mock draft. A little bit early for that still, even though a lot of people are churning them out because they get clicks. We'll talk about some options, some possible targets in rounds 1 through 4. Want to talk a little bit about busts, draft busts, not specific names. I mean, we will talk about some names. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, and I say all the time, I'm terrible at sending out the Twitter handle. If you're not following on Twitter, give me a follow, AceFan23, ACEFan23. I don't do a lot of hot takes, not a lot of crazy stuff off the wall. Just random thoughts or notes or news items as I come across them, what they could mean for the team, things like that. But yeah, AceFan23. But anyway, I sent out a tweet last week showing the Jets' top 10 draft picks. Every player they've picked in the top 10 over the last 30 years, and how well that has or has not worked out, which spurred a pretty good debate with a few listeners who chimed in and agreed with some stuff, disagreed with some others, and it kind of got me thinking, and I wanted to throw it out there on the air. So we'll talk about past Jets draft busts we're talking top 10 picks here. So we're not going to be hearing about Christian Hackenberg and basically anybody taken outside that slot. So top 10 draft pick bust. We're going to look at rounds 1 through 4, some options there, and the news about the players who the Jets did not pick up options on yesterday. And, of course, we'll talk a little bit about Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. So starting off here, as I said at the beginning, Brian Costello of the New York Post reports that a team source has informed him that the Jets, despite many people expecting new defensive coordinator Greg Williams to bring his 4-3 defense with him, Williams will apparently be sticking with a 3-4, which came as a surprise to a lot of people, myself included. And that's not to say that a 3-4 doesn't make sense for this team. So now with the 4-3, we talked about how that could benefit Leonard Williams, and I think that most people are on board with that. But outside of Leo, Darren Lee, we talked about maybe do they move him outside, make him a rush guy, or keep him in the middle where he can cover more ground. The concern there is that he does get eaten up by bigger, guards and centers, and he did a better job last year of defeating some blocks, but still isn't a guy who's shown he can do it consistently. And then what do you do with Avery Williamson? I mean, you almost have to move Darren Lee outside because of Williamson's contract, and that's all if they stayed with the 4-3. So here's why the 3-4 does make sense. As I just mentioned, the linebackers. You can keep Darren Lee and Avery Williamson in the middle. Williamson's making a ton of money, and he played well last year. Darren Lee, entering his 4th season, had his best year as a pro. Doesn't mean he didn't make a stupid mistake or several stupid mistakes during the season because, as has been reported, player suspensions under the substance abuse policy don't come until you have multiple violations. So we don't know what Darren Lee was using. We know it was not PEDS. I keep seeing people say, oh, my God, this PEDS stuff. Darren Lee, that's why he played well, because he was on PEDS. He was not suspended for PEDS. He was suspended for violating the league's substance abuse policy, not performance enhancer policy. Neither one is good. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying there's a difference. And to say that he only played well because we now know he's on PEDS is inaccurate. We don't know if he was on PEDS. We know he was on something that is on the banned substance list. So anyway, Darren Lee, you hope he keeps his nose clean, and you hope he keeps trending in the right direction. where he was, he's very good in coverage last year. Better against the run. Not great, but better. You have him and Williamson in the middle. And now, of course, you have Jordan Jenkins on the outside, who we talked about previously as a guy who probably wouldn't fit in Greg Williams' 4-3. Maybe you give him some work at defensive end, but you don't know how that's going to turn out. So now Jordan Jenkins probably keeps his job, although it may not be a lock with Adam Gase. And it shouldn't be. He's a good player, but he's not Lawrence Taylor. If they find a better player, they find a better player. But I'm rooting for. I like Jordan Jenkins. I think he's a high character guy, good player. That allows you to keep him out there. It opens the door to bring in Josh Allen. Makes it more likely they bring in Josh Allen to play on the other side of Jordan Jenkins. And now maybe Jordan Jenkins, instead of being a guy who gets you 7 sacks, maybe gets you 10, maybe gets you 11. Who knows? You've got a more aggressive defense now, presumably under Greg Williams, and you may have a legitimate edge rusher on the opposite side, which could only help. So it probably good news for Jenkins. How it affects the draft, and we talked about, or I mentioned a second ago, how this opens up the door for Josh Allen, and this is what made me wonder if this story is true, and not if Brian Costello is reporting false news, but if what's being given to him is being put out there. Like, maybe you're the Jets and maybe Quinnen Williams is your top guy. Maybe he's the guy you want at 3. Maybe you look at Quinnen Williams and think, this guy might be Warren Sapp. This might be a Hall of Fame type player. We want this guy. And so maybe you're less likely to take him in a 3-4 and you're more likely to lean toward Josh Allen. So you put that little nugget out there, and maybe a team that would have traded up ahead of you or wanted to target Quinnen Williams, maybe now they sit back and go, okay, this guy's less of a fit. Josh Allen makes more sense in a 3-4. We'll see. My gut is that they go with a 3-4 for the reasons I just mentioned. Williamson's making a ton of money. Darren Lee going in the right direction. It makes Jordan Jenkins, keeps him valuable, and opens the door for a Henry Anderson return. Because we all kind of felt like he was, felt like Henry Anderson's departure was a sure thing because of the fact that they were going to a 4-3 and he wasn't a great fit. So now maybe Henry Anderson comes back, Leo stays. The nose is going to be interesting, and this is what I was going to get into next, is that there was news the other day that the Jets, for whatever reason, opted not to pick up the options on a few different players. Mike Pennel, defensive lineman Mike Pennel, Kevin Pierre-Louis, the inside linebacker, and Terrence Brooks, backup safety. So Pennel got a lot of reps. Pierre-Louis, Brooks are backups. But it's the Pennel and the Pierre-Louis that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're staying with a 3-4. Not that these are game-changing players. But if you're the Jets right now, you only have 39 guys under contract. You need depth. Everyone needs depth across the board. So if you keep Pennel and Pierre-Louis under contract, neither one making a ton of money, around $2 million each, somewhere in that neighborhood, there's no harm in keeping them on board. Now, you have to believe if they let Pennel go, they like the idea of Folorunza Fatukasi. Had a redshirt year, interior D lineman out of a small school, big jump to the NFL. With Pennel and McClendon, there wasn't really an urgent need to have Fatukasi on the field. So maybe he's a redshirt and they view him as a starter. Pierre-Louis spent the year injured a lot, but I loved what I saw out of him in camp. I loved what I saw out of him on film with the Chiefs before the Jets signed him. I thought he'd be a real quality backup, played very well on special teams for the Jets, and for whatever reason, they opted to let him go too. So you're down, you have 39 guys under contract. And newsflash, 10, 11, 12 of those guys are practice squad types. So really, it's you need some bodies in here. So that's why letting Pennel and Pierre-Louis go doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not like you needed to, free up cap space. I don't think the difference between $95 million and $99 million is going to greatly impact your approach in free agency. So little bit of a head scratcher there with both moves. But they did what they did. Pennel, Pierre-Louis, Terrence Brooks, all gone. As I said, opens the door for Fatukasi. And Brooks, Brooks was a nice player as a backup, but I think they like Middleton. And even more so, Brandon Bryant, the undrafted rookie last year. They entered the supplemental draft, wasn't taken. Jets signed him as a free agent. As I said, I've said a few times, if you go back and watch that final preseason game, and yes, I get it, it's preseason, I know, but he looked like a solid player in that fourth preseason game. You kind of looked at him and thought, oh, okay, this is what the Jets see in this guy. So maybe they liked him enough that they felt like he could stay on board. That erases a need for another backup safety, especially with Doug Middleton. So you've got May, you've got Adams, you've got Middleton, and you've got Bryant. So maybe that's why you let Terrence Brooks walk. But either way, they're gone. Greg Williams expected to stay with a 3-4. And as we've said before, Greg Williams runs a ton of fronts. You see it all over Twitter. You see, just watch some games. Watch some of the stuff he did with the Rams. Look at what he did with the Browns. A lot of different fronts. There's no. It's not like he's married. No defensive coordinator anymore is married to a scheme where they're playing it a ton of time, or, a high percentage of the time. We know this. Your base defense now, of course, it's important, but it's probably never been less important, given the frequency with which we see teams come out in nickel and dime sets to defend, 4 and 5 receiver sets. It happens a lot. You have a lot of these hybrid players who can come in and, you can disguise in a lot of different spots, which is why, for me personally, right now, today, if I'm picking 3 for the Jets, I want Josh Allen. Because Josh Allen can get after the passer, because Josh Allen can drop back in pass coverage better than you would expect a guy his size. I like the idea of him and Jamal Adams both being around the line of scrimmage, and defenders not really knowing what either one of them are going to do, because they can both get after the quarterback and they can both cover. So it'll give Greg Williams the opportunity to show a lot of looks up front. So the possibility of both those guys and Greg Williams' defense is enticing to me. I know there are a lot of talks about some other options they could go with in that spot in the top 10. But for me personally, I would go Josh Allen. I've said it before. Trade down with my number one option. That's what I'd really like to see happen. But, and I think given as few or as many holes as they have on this roster, or just as many open spots on the roster, the Jets should be looking to acquire more picks, and probably will. But they will be picking, again, as of today, 3rd overall in the top 10. So with that, let's talk about the Jets' top 10 picks, or picks inside the top 10 over the last 30 years. There have been, how many total? 11. 11 times the Jets have picked in the top 10 over the last 30 years. Those picks are as follows. And actually, I take that back. We're not going to include the last 3. We're not going to include Leo. We're not going to include Jamal Adams. We're not going to include Sam Darnold, because the book is not written on those guys yet. They all look like they can play. Okay? At varying levels. Yes, Leonard Williams has been a bit of a disappointment up to now, but he can still play. He's not D. Milner. Okay? He's not Vernon Golston. He's not Mark Sanchez. He's a guy who can play. Even if he spends the rest of his career, if he spends another 10, 12 years in the league as an above average defensive lineman, because that's what he is right now, he will have been a good player. And and before we get into the exact picks, I wanted to talk about defining a bust. How do you define a bust? There is no universally accepted definition among NFL fans for the term bust. I know for years I felt like the term bust meant you're terrible. You don't belong in the league. You were a wasted draft pick. You busted out of the league, basically. Whether it's Tony Mandarich or Vernon Golston or any of these guys, Ryan Leaf, who within a couple of years, they're out of the league. That I always thought that was always my definition of a bust for years. And I would get in arguments with people, and it still happens now, and it happened on Twitter the other day. Cordial, kept it cordial. Always try to, take the high road on the Twitter. But I view a bust now, and this is because really, like I said, I Googled it. I looked up NFL terms, bust. And the best I could find was a couple sites that said a bust is a player who doesn't meet expectations. That's pretty broad. Because honestly, whose expectations are we talking about here? Because fans can be crazy. And fans want everyone to be great. If you went by some people's definition or by some people's expectations, you'd have to say about 98% of NFL draft picks are busts. So to say fall short of expectations, I mean, unless it's blatantly obvious, then who decides the player is a bust? So the way I look at it now, in trying to decide what in my mind justifies a bust, is that if you can't make a valid case that not a GM, that an owner, if you gave an owner a crystal ball and he could see into the future, is there any chance he would make that same pick again? If not, you're a bust. The team regrets having drafted you. And I don't mean just because the guy after you was better than you are. Just talking from a measured, reasonable perspective. Could you look at the player and say, you know what? The guy didn't meet our expectations, but we could have done a lot worse. We'd make that move again. And again, there's no perfect definition. Everyone's got their own definition. I had somebody tell me one time that Desmond Howard was not a bust as an NFL draft pick. And I think that's kind of what got me in this, gave me that definition. Because I said to the guy, he said, Desmond Howard wasn't a bust because he won a Super Bowl MVP as a punt returner or kick returner. And I said to him, so if you were the owner that drafted Desmond Howard, if you were the Washington Redskins, you would make that pick again? You would draft Desmond Howard all over again with the 4th overall pick? And by year 4, he's not on your team anymore? That's a bust. Because a guy had a good moment or 100 good moments with a team other than the team that drafted him, that's a bust. And that's what I'm not even saying every bust is a bad player. Okay? And that's part of the crux of this. Because one of the busts on here, and I'll get to them in a second, is a guy who went on to have a really good career. But as a Jet, he wasn't good. So as a Jets fan, looking at Jets draft picks, that's what I'm looking at that pick and saying, would the Jets ownership make that pick again? If I tell you this guy's name and you look at his numbers with the Jets and see that you let him walk after his rookie deal because you didn't think he was that good? Oh, but he made a bunch of Pro Bowls with another team. I don't care about the other team. I'm talking about New York Jets players and draft picks and whether or not they were a bust for the New York Jets. Whether or not the guy was good somewhere else is another conversation. So yes, in my mind, you can be a bust and still have a good career. Maybe you're not a bust in NFL terms, but I'm not talking NFL terms. I'm talking Jets. Jets top 10 picks over the last 30 years, before Mike McCagnon arrived, they were as follows. D. Milner, 2013, is a bust. Okay, and I did a little article on this, and I think that's one pick where John Idzik probably gets a little too much heat. As much of a screw-up and a failure as John Idzik was, D. Milner was rated in that slot. A million mock drafts had him going in the top 10. Everyone looks back and goes, oh, he had all those injuries in college. He never missed any games in college. Guys get nicked up. Guys get dinged up. Players get nicked up in college and miss some games here and there. D. Milner never missed a game in college. Had a terrible start to his career. Then over the last month of his rookie season, he looked fantastic. Phenomenal. And you thought, okay, he's coming into his own. And then the guy could just never get healthy after that. Okay? Matter of fact, the last time we saw him on an NFL football field for a full game came in his second season, and I believe it was against the San Diego Chargers. And he had a pretty damn good game. Some passes defended. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Geno Smith movie game. So but that's a pick you wouldn't make again. You can't. That's a bust. That's not even questionable. Okay, so prior to D. Milner, the most recent top 10 pick before that, Mark Sanchez. This is a hotly contested discussion among Jets fans. I don't care what anybody says. He was a bust. Yeah, he won a couple playoff games. Fantastic. Great. Amazing. Lifetime with the Jets, 68 touchdowns through the air, 69 interceptions, and a 55% completion percentage. How many times did we have to watch that guy throw into double coverage? His teammates, Darrelle Revis, Damian Woody, Bart Scott, guys who played on that team, guys who played offense, guys who played defense, they've come out since then and said he held us back. He couldn't throw anything, outside the intermediate range. He wasn't very good. I get that for Jets fans like myself, who have been following this team for 30, who didn't see the Super Bowl, their Super Bowl victory a million years ago, but I've been around a little while, 30 years as a Jets fan. And if you've been a Jets fan for 30 years or less, I don't see how you could argue that win against New England in New England in the playoffs, it's the most enjoyable victory you've ever had as a Jets fan. If there's another one, I would ask you to offer your take on that. But to me, that's probably the biggest win outside the damn Super Bowl win. Okay, so yes, thank you, Mark Sanchez. You played the game of your life in Foxborough and gave myself and other Jets fans an incredible evening, an incredible moment where we thought the team might be special. Okay? However, one big game, and even 2 or 3 big games. I mean, he had the 4 playoff wins. Yeah, one of them came against the Chargers when he threw for 99 yards. The guy was carried by his defense and special team, or by his defense and running game, and special teams chipped in. That's why Mark Sanchez didn't. That's like the Tebow heads who say, "Oh, look at all these games Tebow's winning in the last minute." Yeah, they're beating everybody with last-second field goals because the defense is having to pitch shutouts, and it takes Tebow 3.5 quarters to make a play. If you didn't have the best defense in the NFL or a top 3 defense, you'd win, 2-3 games a year with a quarterback like that. Same thing with Mark Sanchez. If the Jets didn't have the number 1 defense and running game in the NFL with him, they're a 3 or 4 win team. And then he goes to being a backup. And a couple years later, he's third string. Now he's a street free agent. He played a couple games with the Redskins last year. Looked decent one week, came out the next week. He was Sanchez again. Benched. That's a bust. Top 10 pick at quarterback. Just because the defense and running game dragged him to a couple playoff wins. And again, that Cincinnati game, he played well. But how did he play well in those games? What did they do? Go back and watch that game. I think the run-pass ratio was something like 41-16. They just ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. Play action, completion. Run, 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 run. Play action, completion. They had to hide him. They were so limited by what they could do on offense on him. They had to pull out every trick in the book to hide the quarterback and let the defense and running game make all the plays. If you're a top 10 pick at quarterback And after 5 years, you have more touchdowns and interceptions, 55% completion percentage, can't win another starting job, and you're out of the league a few years later, that's a bust. Yes, granted, a bust who had a couple of nice Sundays. A bust who won a couple playoff games. Fantastic. The Jets never gave him a chance. Did the Eagles not give him a chance? Did the Bears not give him a chance? Did the Redskins not give him a chance? How many teams does he have to fail with before you say, you know what? Guy's not very good. And I'm sure he's a great guy. Sure, he's a wonderful human being. But spare me this. Mark Sanchez won us 4 playoff games. No, Mark Sanchez was the quarterback on a team that won 4 playoff games. This wasn't Peyton Manning or Tom Brady putting his team on his back and carrying them to victory. If he doesn't fumble if he doesn't have that fumble in the first half of the Pittsburgh game that gets run back for a touchdown, that team maybe goes to the Super Bowl. That was the difference in that game. I mean, yeah, that Jets defense got beat up pretty good in the first half, but they didn't give up a lot of points. They had every chance to win that game. And Sanchez was absolutely lights out in the second half. He was so good in the second half that the Jets would have won that game if he hadn't fumbled in the first half and gave Pittsburgh a touchdown. So Mark Sanchez, couple of nice moments. Granted, thank you so much for the win in New England. Much appreciated. Bust. 2008, Vernon Golston. Biggest bust in franchise history. There is no close second. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. Don't talk to me about Christian Hackenberg. Don't talk to me about Johnny Lamb Jones. Don't talk to me about Dwayne Robertson. Hackenberg's out of the conversation automatically because he's a second rounder. Don't care. We're talking big. If you want to talk biggest busts, Lamb Jones. Oh, they gave up 2 first rounders. They gave up 2 picks to move up to get him. Dwayne Robertson gave up 2 picks to move up and get him. Blair Thomas, 2nd overall pick. Highest guy on the list, right? He was terrible. Golston is the only guy on that list. Those are your big ones right there. Golston, Blair Thomas, Lamb Jones. If you want to have that conversation. Golston's the only one who never made a damn play in his career. Not once. Blair Thomas had a 100-yard game. Blair Thomas, I'm sure he scored, 4 or 5 touchdowns. He was terrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, when you're talking players who perform this poorly, you got to put them under a microscope and dissect the badness. And there was a lot of it. But for Golston, not 1 sack, not 1 forced fumble, not 1 fumble recovery, nothing. Never made a single play that he was drafted to make. Lamb Jones scored some touchdowns. Blair Thomas scored some touchdowns. Golston, nada. Nothing. Bust. Prior to Golston, DeBrickashaw Ferguson. Biggest hit on the list, really, over the last 30 years. Missed 1 snap in his career. Ridiculous. What a ridiculous career that guy had. Fantastic player. Comes across as a great guy. Look forward to seeing him go in the Ring of Honor one day. Canton candidate? Maybe. Maybe. We'll see. All right, so prior to the Brick, top 10, the most recent top 10 pick before him, already discussed him, Dwayne Robertson. He was another one. Jets gave up a couple picks to get him, moved in the top 10. And so a couple things with Dwayne Robertson. Mangini played him out of position. He was 315 pounds, and Mangini's got him playing the nose. And everyone's in a tough spot there. Mangini didn't draft him, but he was such a high pick that they had to keep him. Mangini wasn't a guy who was going to negotiate and go with the scheme that suited his players because he was an egomaniac, and it was going to be my scheme no matter what, even if we don't have the players to run it. So Robertson's out of the league in a few years. But the thing with him is that they were idiots for drafting him. It came out years later that Dwayne Robertson had a degenerative hip condition that the Jets knew about when they traded up to draft him. What an idiotic move. That's such a Jets move. Let's draft this 315-pound human being whose job it's going to be to fight other 315-pound human beings whose hip is falling apart. Gone. Out of the league after being traded to Denver. Top 10 pick before that, 1996, number 1 overall, Keyshawn Johnson. And now he's another one. You can't call it a bust. You can't. But it was not good. Like, you pick number 1 overall. The goal there isn't 10-year starter, which he wasn't with the Jets. The goal at number 1 overall is franchise-altering player. You get the best player in the country, ideally. You got Keyshawn Johnson, played 4 years, had some nice seasons, some great moments, very good possession receiver. Was never any. If he was half as good as he thought he was, he would have been better than Santana Moss or Randy Moss, better than Jerry Rice. If he was half as good as he thought he would. I've never heard a guy talk himself up the way Keyshawn did. Anybody who writes a book after their rookie year saying, throw me the damn ball, I mean, the ego on that guy. And that's why he didn't stay with the Jets. He had a couple years left on his deal. His good buddy Joey Galloway got a huge contract. And Keyshawn was jealous. He wanted to top his buddy Joey Galloway. And you know, full disclosure, this is all off the top of my head from years ago when this all went down. I could be mistaken about the exact, but I remember because the Jets had a policy. They would not negotiate with players who had more than a year left on their deal. Keyshawn was demanding a new deal because Galloway just got paid, and Keyshawn had 2 years left, so they had to trade him. So going back to my original definition of a bust, if you're a GM, do you make that pick again? Do you look at what happened with Keyshawn Johnson, a guy you took with the number 1 overall pick? Granted, you got 2 firsts for him, which is nice. 2 first-round picks from the Bucs. But if I'm your GM and I come to you and I say, we're taking this guy number 1 overall, and you use your crystal ball, and you see that guy's going to be gone in a few years in exchange for some draft picks, do you make that pick again? I don't know that you do. But we'll call him, I just class him as a malcontent. Not a bust, not a stud. But the next one is the big one. This is the one that got fans upset. 1997, Bill Parcells selects linebacker James Farrior. And man, were people upset that I called James Farrior a bust. And again, and I had to explain this to people, I am talking about Jets players with the Jets. Now, if I had been doing an article on best free agent or a tweet, sending out a tweet or writing an article about the best free agent signings for the Pittsburgh Steelers, James Farrior makes that list. Great addition. Fantastic. But I wasn't doing a tweet or an article on great Pittsburgh Steelers free agent signings. It was an article about top 10 picks who were busts for the Jets. So Farrior goes 8th overall. Year 1, they start him because he's the 8th overall pick. They keep starting him even though he's not playing well. He gets a sack and a half, 71 tackles as an outside linebacker, 8th overall pick. 1.5 sacks, 71 tackles. You know, yay. Year 2 with the Jets, 2 starts, 27 tackles, 0 sacks. Year 3 with the Jets, 4 starts, 2 sacks, 38 tackles. The following season, 6 starts, 56 tackles, 1 sack. This is 8th overall pick. Top 70 tackles once. Had 2 sacks once. And then 2001 comes, final year of his deal, and he lights it up. At least from a tackle perspective. 142 tackles. Only 5 for loss. Only got in the backfield 5 times. Again, 1 sack. Had him play on the inside then, if I'm not mistaken. So then the Jets were in a bind. Because we hear it all the time, right? What do fans say? Don't go out and sign the guy who had 1 big season in his walk year. It's a fluke. He's going to go in the tank after that. Don't let him fool you. Don't let him trick you. Well, it seems like that's the approach the Jets took. They said, look, we have a guy who gets us about 40 tackles a year. And then all of a sudden, when there's money on the table, he gets 140. We can't afford to sign this guy and have him go back to being a 40 tackle a year guy. So they let him walk, and I can't blame them. And then he goes to Pittsburgh, and he becomes a Pro Bowler and plays with the Steelers from 2002 to 2011. Tops 100 tackles 6 times. Had a damn good career. Good player. Good football player. As far as the Jets are concerned, get that owner that crystal ball. Say, hey, we're drafting this guy. And that owner takes a look and says, looks like this guy's going to walk after his final year, and he's only going to have one good season. The owner's going to say, let's not waste that pick. Let's get someone that's good enough that we'd like to have them around for a little while. So Farrier, to me, as a Jets draft pick, is a bust. Prior to that, 95, Kyle Brady. He should have just played offensive tackle. Had a decent career with the Jaguars. And I sent out a tweet about this too, because enough people got upset with me over that assertion that a guy who plays 3-4 years with you and sucks and then goes somewhere else and plays well. I asked, is this a bust? 70% of fans agreed that's a bust. And around 400 votes. So no, it's not Rich Cimini getting 20,000 votes on a poll. But 400 fans, 70% of them said that's a bust. And I don't 5% said it's a great pick. Who the hell says that's a great pick? Who the hell says, man, remember that time we drafted that guy and he sucked for 4 years and then he was great somewhere else? Oh, I'm so glad we picked him. That was a great pick. What the hell are people thinking? Great pick for who? Jesus. Anyway, Kyle Brady had a nice enough little career for himself with the Jaguars. But as a Jet, he was terrible. Hands of stone. Decent blocker. That was it. Marvin Jones came out of FSU. Man, I thought Marvin Jones was going to be a Hall of Famer. Thought he was going to be all world. Turned out he was damn good. He's probably the next best guy on this list, really, as far as the Jets are concerned. So Marvin Jones, damn good pick. Not great. Again, didn't go to the Hall. Battled some injuries early on, but patrolled the middle of the field, middle of the defense for a long time and did a nice job. 1990, Brian Thomas. That one will always sting because of Ed Reed. But again, we're only looking at this in terms of how the player performed. And Brian Thomas is one of the more interesting ones because he is one of those guys who fits the category, was nowhere near what the Jets thought he would be because of his speed out of UAB. They thought he was going to be a double-digit sack guy regularly, and he wasn't. But he had himself a solid 10-year career. And you look at and this is where people say, oh, he was a bust. And I'm like, if you're going to call him a bust in terms of, coming up short of expectations, and maybe that is a pick the owner doesn't make again. Maybe he does. Probably doesn't. But are you going to put him in the same category as D. Milner and Vernon Golston and Mark Sanchez and Kyle Brady? If you want to call him a bust, you got to have different classifications. You can't lump Brian Thomas in with Vernon Golston. I'm sorry. And I've seen Brian Thomas called a bust many times. I thought he was a good player. And you could make the case he wasn't a bust. He's the most interesting guy on the list in terms of that. Everyone else, I think, is clearly a bust or not. And last but not least, 1988, offensive lineman Dave Cadigan. Full disclosure, I was just a kid back then. That's about the time I got into football, 87. And let's face it, your first few years as a kid, you're just following the ball, not watching the line play a whole lot. But Cadigan, I just don't remember being a very good player. And he didn't stay with the team very long. So for that reason, we're calling him a bust. So what do you have? You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 guys, 8 of them busts, with Brian Thomas being on the bubble. 2 of them were studs. DeBrickashaw, Ferguson, Marvin Jones. And then I just put Keyshawn down as a malcontent. Keyshawn, you could not call a bust. But a guy who wants to leave after a few years and ends up on another team, is that a pick you're happy with at the end of the day? So don't confuse this with, is this guy a good player? Because some people say, well, it's not a bust. It was a wasted draft pick. Well, now we're splitting hairs. Are we going to say a guy's a wasted pick, but he's not a bust? I mean, can you be both of those things? If you look back at a guy you picked and you view that pick as a waste, that's a bust. So anyway, that's that. Since then, since the Jets, so what do we say? 3 guys out of 11. Let's even count Brian Thomas. Let's count Keyshawn Johnson and Brian Thomas, just for the sake of being, generous. That means that in their last 11 draft picks that were in the top 10, the Jets hit on 4. 7 misses, 4 hits. And I'm not talking about superstar hits. I'm talking about good player for a long time. So it looks like if things continue to go the way they are, and especially if Leo picks up his play a little bit and sticks around, looks like Mike Maccagnan will be 3 for 3 with top 10 picks. Now, he has to get better outside of that. But as I've said many times before, I think that picking Jamal Adams over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson has upset some fans so much that they're just never going to give Mike Maccagnan credit for anything. Every move he makes is terrible. Anything good is luck. We've talked about this before. It's like, beating a dead horse. But that's, we got another draft coming up. We got some young players who will hopefully get another shot under a new coach, and hopefully these guys do a better job moving forward. Some of these young kids. But let's talk. First, we're going to talk free agency real quick. Okay. And actually, not even. This is going to be a quick little snippet here. The news came out the other day. The Pittsburgh Steelers will not be slapping Le'Veon Bell with a transition tag. Le'Veon Bell is going to be a free agent. The Jets will obviously pursue him heavily. Reports from Manish Mehta that Bell put on some weight. The Jets are concerned about that. And there's also the story that the Jets don't plan on breaking the bank for Bell. Now, define breaking the bank. Are they going to offer 12 and he wants 13? Where are you drawing the line? And how firm is it? If you go into free agency saying, look, we're going to offer him 12, but we're willing to go 15, and then him and his agent won't come down from 17, are you going to lose him over $2 million? We'll see. But he absolutely should be the Jets' top target in free agency, not only because he's a running back, but because this is not a very strong receiver crop in free agency, and he's a pretty damn good receiver too. So just the multidimensional aspect that he brings, his suddenness, his explosion, it makes him worth it. Even if you structure the deal in a way you give him a ton of money in the first 3 years, and then, smaller money after that and the ability to cut ties with him if Father Time catches up with him. But I think having the year off in Pittsburgh, I've talked about that before. I think that year off could add a couple, 1-2 years of quality play to his career. Now, his teammate, Antonio Brown, is not a free agent. He is not able to go wherever he would like. The Steelers are shopping him. Teams will likely show heavy interest in him at the scouting combine. But the Jets should not be one of those teams. This guy is on the books for $21 million and doesn't show up for a Week 17 game last year. Goes on social media to say he would like to now be known as Mr. Big Chest and call me up if you've got cap room and guaranteed money. This dude is out of his mind, and I've talked about this before, and I'll say it again, and you don't have to like it, but teams win Super Bowls consistently without players of Antonio Brown's stature. Okay? We've done the list. And some guys have come close. I got it. But Antonio Brown, no rings. T.O., no rings. Randy Moss, no rings. Julio Jones, no rings. Chris Carter, no rings. The list of Hall of Fame receivers who don't win Super Bowls, and then the guys who do win them, Julian Edelman, Alshon Jeffrey. Who are some of the others? Doug Baldwin. Okay? You don't need an Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown's been in the league 9 years. The Steelers have 0 Super Bowl rings in his time. The Jets need to get better at receiver. They don't need a guy who's losing his mind, demanding more money from another team when he's got $21 million coming and didn't show up for a Week 17 game when his team needed him. Stay clear of him. And I get it. I mean, you don't think as a fan that I think about the possibility of lining up Antonio Brown and Robbie Anderson across from each other? Are you kidding me? Good Lord. That's 2 of the best deep threats in the NFL. Guys underneath like Herndon, Enunwa, anybody, whoever, me, you, listening to this podcast right now. Be able to get open. Well, not me. But be able to get open underneath. I understand it. Bell? Imagine Le'Veon Bell. I'm starting to talk myself into this now. But no. No Antonio Brown. But Jesus. Antonio Brown, Robbie Anderson, and Bell with Herndon and Enunwa. Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't hate it. But don't do it. Don't do it. If you do it, I'd probably get on board with it. But I don't like the idea of bringing a guy like that into a locker room with a young quarterback, especially given the fact that, some of the reports out of Pittsburgh said that a lot of Le'Veon Bell's heartache had to do with the fact that Juju Smith-Schuster was starting to shine in that offense. We don't need a guy coming in here who's going to start getting, pissy in the huddle because someone else is having a good game. Steer clear of him. Steer clear. As much fun as it sounds like, as much as you might feel like the Jets would be playing Madden, having Sam Darnold throw to those guys, just don't do it. Address receiver elsewhere, some other way. So, moving on to the draft. That's our little free agency talk. Really just wanted to talk about Bell and Brown at that point, because their names are being floated quite a bit. And again, understandably so. But NFL draft. So like I said, this is not going to be a mock draft. This is not going to be 7 rounds. I had a thought though. Speaking of round 7, I think the Jets could find themselves in a position where, and this won't be exciting but a type of thing that could end up paying off in the long haul, in the long run. This is where having so few roster spots could come in to benefit the Jets in the long run. You'd have to imagine when the draft winds down and those top undrafted guys, those top priority free agents, their phones start ringing. If you're an offensive guy, you're going to want to come to the Jets. Because you got a shot to play. You got a shot to play with a great young quarterback. And, I mean, those young guys, they want to make a roster. You're an undrafted free agent. When you and your agent sit down and talk, you have to be making out a list. Where do I have the best chance to make a roster? And if you're a receiver, a tight end, and if you're an agent, you're doing your client a disservice. If you're not saying, hey, man, go to New York. Even if they draft a guy and sign a guy, teams are going to carry 5, 6, 7 receivers. So come draft time, when the draft wraps up, that's something I want to keep my eye on. I think the Jets might be one of those teams this year that winds up signing 3 or 4 top priority undrafted free agents. And don't fool yourselves, folks. Look around the NFL. Look at the Pro Bowl. Every year, there's a ton of undrafted guys there. Teams miss on players all the time. If that wasn't true, you wouldn't have 20, 30 Pro Bowlers who were undrafted. you will find undrafted players who can play in the NFL. And the Jets, after the draft, which, as I've said, priority one, trade down. If you can't trade down, here's some names. Let's throw out here. Some food for thought. All right, so you're the New York Jets. You're on the clock at 3. The 3rd overall pick. I don't see how, as I said earlier, I think it's got to be Josh Allen if I'm the Jets. I mean, if Bosa falls, of course. But I'll tell you, the Bosa thing, what worries me with him is the injuries. I mean, do you want to use a 3rd overall pick on a guy? We just talked about D. Milner a little while ago. A guy who never missed games in college and couldn't stay healthy in the NFL. Bosa's had a lot of injuries. He's missed some time. But he's the consensus number 1 guy. We'll play along and we'll say the Jets take him if he's at 3. If he doesn't fall and Quinnen Williams goes 2, Bosa goes 1, Quinnen Williams 2, the Jets, you got to go Josh Allen at 3. Gotta. Other possibilities, names we've been hearing, of course, Quinnen Williams, who I just mentioned. And that's another pick that I've kind of talked myself into a little bit. Didn't want to believe I would be heading toward the draft this year and in favor of the Jets taking a D lineman. But when you look at Quinnen Williams, he looks like a hell of a player. So, I mean, he could be a guy. But again, is he as good of a fit in a 3-4? He'd probably be able to play anything. Guy just beats the hell out of the guy in front of him. But Quinnen Williams has to be a possibility. So Bosa, Allen, Williams. I've seen Rashawn Gary, D lineman out of Michigan. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not going to lie and say I've watched a ton of Rashawn Gary, but what I have watched, I haven't seen a lot of variety. I mean, if you're gonna make it in the NFL, and it's not as if it's something that can't be coached up over time, but he doesn't show a lot of moves. He just shows brute strength. And you know what? And I always say you can't let past picks scare you out of future picks. But when I see that, I worry because that was my number 1 thing with Vernon Golston. I didn't see a lot of him in college. Golston, that's a long time ago. But when I went to some Jets games when he was a rookie, I just remember thinking, like, man, this guy just all he does is try to bull rush. He doesn't have a move. No spin, no rip, no dip, seeing nothing. And from what the bits of Rashawn Gary I've watched, that's what I've noticed. That's what's jumped out at me, worries me a little bit. So Charlie Casserly, I think, mocked him to the Jets the other day too. So who's that? Todd McShay, and now Charlie Casserly, both mocking him to the Jets. I don't like it, to be honest. Now, we'll just touch on this real quick. If the Jets trade back, let's say they move back, and they move back to 7. I think it's 7. That's when you start considering Jonah Williams, Alabama offensive tackle. We'll even say just top 10. Let's say they trade back to 7, 6, 7, or 10. I think those are the slots I saw where they realistically could get a phone call. Jonah Williams, Brian Burns out of FSU, a really good edge guy, potentially really good edge guy. Montez Sweat, Mississippi State. Those guys can get after the quarterback. I've seen them drafted. I've seen them projected in the top 10, top 15. So if you're in that area, in that neighborhood. But Jonah Williams, as I discussed before, wouldn't mind seeing him drafted, start this season at left guard, kick him out to left tackle next year. But staying with the picks they have, even if they, I know I said a hypothetical trade down, we're not going to do any additional picks there. We're just going to say round 3. So if you're picking in the 3rd round, and I think in terms of the running back position, it's got to be Le'Veon Bell or a draft pick. Don't spend big money on. If you're going to spend big money on a running back, let it be Le'Veon Bell. I don't want Mark Ingram. I want Le'Veon Bell or a rookie. So maybe you go with Harris from Alabama, who looks like a really good player, who some people projecting there being in the 3rd round. Or do you go O-line? A couple guys I've had a chance to watch who I've been impressed with. Connor McGovern from Penn State, guard. Max Sharping. Haven't seen a ton of him. It's hard to get stuff on him, Northern Illinois. But what I've heard about him, Senior Bowl and some PFF stuff, and the little bit I've been able to find on him to watch, I have been impressed. Plays tackle. Michael Jordan. Of course, the jokes for that one will be rolling in. But interior lineman, guard, center type out of OSU. Looks like he can play. Wouldn't mind that in the third round. And really, I wouldn't hate the idea as much. Some people might say this is crazy, and I may have mentioned this recently. I would not hate the idea of another tight end, even though you have Chris Herndon. If you can get another guy who can block and catch, and this is a deep class, you might be able to get one. I would not be opposed to that. Maybe out of Stanford, you get Caden Smith, someone like that, in the third round, who'll probably be there at that point. I'll tell you what, double tight ends with Robbie and Quincy and a slot guy, however you want to mix that up. A lot of possibilities there. And I wouldn't discount the possibility of a tight end because it's such a deep class. And you just want quality targets for Sam Darnold is what you're going for. This offseason is about protecting him and finding him quality targets. Round 3 with that second pick, sticking with the O-line and targets for Darnold. Michael Dieter out of Wisconsin. He's been impressive. West Virginia wide receiver David Stills is another guy who I would definitely take a look at. As long as Jacoby Myers out of NC State. Another wide receiver, fourth round. That second, third rounder. Think he'll be on the board there. We'll see what happens as the draft approaches and some of these names start to pick up. But Savion Smith, he's a guy that I like in round 4. I think he's going to go higher than that. Going off of what I'm seeing on some of the online mocks, where these guys are going to go. Smith is a guy I'm curious to see his measurables at the combine. He's probably going to come in at 6'1", 6'2", and he looks like he's got rangy, just long like Antonio Cromartie type arms. I'm curious to see what he measures at the combine. He's definitely a guy you got to look at, and a guy like that, because again, what's going to happen in free agency is not a lot of great corners because they don't hit free agency. Maybe you bring Morris Claiborne back, as I've said before. Maybe you give Derek Jones a real look, but you can't bank on any of these guys, either of those guys. Even if you love Derek Jones, he's not proven anything. Even if you like Claiborne coming back, he does still have the injury history. He's been better of late, but still significant enough that you can't just completely dismiss that out of hand. And I just wanted to touch on some of these names this week because next week we're going to do a deeper dive on these guys, on all of them. And we're going to go all 7 rounds next week. And I haven't decided yet. Depending on how much I get done, maybe we do a full 7-round mock. Or maybe we go deeper dive on top 4 rounds. Something along those lines. Because it's coming up on that time now, folks. Free agency previews, mock drafts, things of that nature. They're all about to start flowing in. And it should be an interesting offseason. The Jets have a lot of spots to fill on that roster. Currently sitting at 39 players under contract. Like I said, probably a dozen of those guys are fringe bubble practice squad guys. So really you've got about 25 guys on the roster, 26 guys on the roster who you can look at and say this guy's making the roster. So that's roughly half. Between now and opening day, the Jets have to put together basically one half of an NFL roster. That's a huge overhaul. And I do hope some of these young practice squad guys do stick because they've been with the team, they've been in the system. Guys like Ben Braden, even if it's as a backup, hopefully some of these guys win some jobs and the Jets start cultivating some talent with some of these young practice squad guys. But until next week, where we will, as I said, go deeper. We'll go full 7 rounds, and we'll go more in detail. Today was like an overview. Let's throw some names out there. Let's see how people react, what people think. Throw out a few possibilities. But next week's going to be a little bit more in-depth, touching on specific strengths and weaknesses of guys that the Jets should be targeting. We look forward to doing that, and we look forward to you tuning in. So thank you so much for joining us this week on Jet Nation Radio. Have a great night, Jets fans. Take care.